Today's going to be a really short one. We're going to cover how North Carolina ended up with the nickname the Rip Van Winkle State. Welcome to Learn with Sprayberry, where we try to make social studies fun, easy, and educational. Today's topic is how North Carolina ended up with one of the weirdest nicknames of any state in the country. And naturally, it comes from an unlikely place. Story time. In 1819, Washington Irving wrote a short story about a guy named Rip Van Winkle. The story takes place before and after the Revolutionary War. In the story, Rip heads off into the mountains with his dog, hoping to avoid his wife chewing him out. And just a hint for all of you out there who think that might be a good idea, it's not. Anyway, he's walking around the woods and Rip hears his name being called and looks around. He spots a guy carrying a keg through the mountains. Now that's not weird enough, the guy is wearing some very old Dutch clothing. In modern terms, it would be like going on a hike in 2020 and spotting a guy carrying a keg over his shoulder dressed like he's from the 1950s. As a sidebar, this is probably a really early story of like stranger danger kind of situation. If all that isn't weird enough, Rip and his dog make the incredibly dubious decision to follow this guy deeper into the woods. Yeah. Rip and his new friend, Weird Dutch Guy, end up at a clearing in the woods with a bowling lane and a group of Dutch Guy's friends. Rip decides to join Dutch Guy and his friends for a couple of rounds of bowling, and since there's a keg there, well, he gets in on that too. Long story short, hanging out and drinking equals sleepy time. Rip starts yawning and sits down to take a nap. Eventually, he does wake up and he looks around but can't find his dog. Assuming that the dog has wandered off, he picks up his musket, which is rotten all the way through. So he assumes that one of the old Dutchies swapped muskets with him. In all the weirdness, he does realize that he needs to get back home, so he wanders back into town. As he enters town, people keep stopping him and asking him who he voted for, and Rip has no idea what they're talking about. But he responds that he's a subject of King George III. People get all riled up at him because, unknown to him, the Revolutionary War is come and gone, and the election that they're talking about was for George Washington. Before people jump Rip and tear him apart, an old woman recognizes him as the man who disappeared 20 years earlier. Long story short, it turns out that the old Dutch guy in the mountains are the ghosts of Henry Hudson and his famous exploring crew. So Rip was called into the woods by a bunch of dead guys where he was roofied and woke up 20 years later. I mean, if that's not a story about not taking drinks from strangers, I don't know what is. Well, what the heck does this have to do with North Carolina? Good question, faithful viewer. Before I get to that, why don't you take a second and, head on down there and click on that subscribe button. You'll be in the loop for all sorts of brand new social studies content. All right, back to North Carolina and Rip Van Winkle. Well, we in North Carolina earned this nickname because in the 1800s, we might as well have been Rip. We were so far behind the rest of the country that people thought our state was comatose. As the rest of the country is developing roads, trade, and industry, North Carolina is seemingly stuck in the 1700s. A legislative committee for the state reported that North Carolina was without foreign commerce for want of seaports or a staple, without internal communications by rivers, roads, or canals, without a cash market for any article of agricultural product, without manufactures, in short, without any object to which native industry and active enterprise could be directed. In other words, we had no real way to make money or trade with our fellow states. If our state actually managed to create a product, we had no real way to move the products around the state. Seriously, we were handicapping our own development because we hadn't invested in our own state for so long. As far as nicknames go, many people end up with nicknames they don't appreciate. North Carolina was no different. This nickname served as motivation for North Carolina to try to fix the problem. In 1835, North Carolina passed quite a few reforms designed to ramp up development in the state. North Carolina began building railroads, roads, public schools, and manufacturing centers. The state started investing in its development, and much to the relief of its citizens, it started to improve the economy of the state. We could create products and ship those products to customers and finally start making money. Let's bounce on over to question of the day. If you had to pick a character to represent modern day North Carolina, who would you pick and why? Oh yeah, for those of you who don't live here, if you had to pick a character to represent the United States as a whole, who would you pick? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. As always, thanks for watching Learning with Sprayberry, where we try to make social studies fun, easy, and educational. Thanks. Allergies.